Hello everybody, and happy to see you back. Welcome to this 2025 edition of the CAS Lecture Series. Today I have the pleasure to introduce you my friend and colleague, Tommaso Previato. And very few words about him. He holds a joint PhD, one from La Sapienza in Rome, correct, in Chinese studies, and the second one in ethnology from Minzu Daxue in Beijing. He also has been a fellow since, I wrote it here, 2015, 2024 in Academia Sinica in Taiwan, which to anybody who is aware of the Chinese world is a very prestigious institution. But recently he edited a very interesting volume, which I had the pleasure to review, and I recommend to all of you, which is titled Fear, Heterodoxy, and Crime in Traditional China. Is a very interesting book because it combines textual analysis and anthropological methods, focusing on fear in the modern history of China. And most importantly, he focuses on what he calls liminal zones, so which are these areas of China which are often ignored by mainstream looks on China. And today he will also discuss one of these liminal zones, I guess, since his presentation is about textual construction and sainthood in Qadiriyya and Jahriyya Sufism during modern China. And the floor is yours, Tommaso.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Davide, for the introduction. And thank you all for coming to attend today, both in online and in presence. My presentation deals with the textual constructions of Sufi sainthood and their contestation by Muslim reformers in the 20th century China. On second thought, a more fitting title would have been Sufi shrines and self-purification in modern Chinese Islam, but I'll stick to the original title. So let's get started. Union with the divine is a key goal in many ascetic traditions. In Sufism, it is pursued through spiritual sessions or sama, where practitioners invoke God's names or zikr to transcend human imperfection and merge with the divine in a mystical state known as fana fil Allah, or annihilation in God. Today's lecture will look at this system of practices, focusing on two Sufi confraternities in China. One is the Qadiriyya, established in the 17th century, in the late 17th century, by Qi Jingyi, and is the first to take root in northwest part of the country. And the other is called Jahriyya, an offshoot of the Yemeni Naqshbandi tradition, which was introduced to China a century later by Ma Mingxin and labeled as heterodox due to its involvement in anti-dynastics rebellion. The corpus of mystical poetry and hagiographies of these two groups gives insight into the devotional aspects of fana and processes of self-amendment, in which the Sufi master, murshid or shaykh, becomes a tool for unification with God. The lecture will explore narratives of death and martyrdom from this corpus, interpreting them as metaphors for struggles against evil inclinations. Special attention will be given to shrines of Sufi saints, which serve as local pilgrimage sites, providing material support for the practitioner in their undertakings. The analysis aims to problematize the following two questions. One, how does communication with the dead sheikh affect the living practitioners? And two, what role does shrine visitation play in fostering moral development and self-purification among practitioners? My working assumption is that the example set by the dead shaykhs provides a moral compass for the living, inspiring Sufi practitioners to live a more fulfilling life and to give their all in the struggle against the nafs, the carnal soul, the ego, or the animalistic side of self. This will lay the groundwork for a broader discussion on how pious visits to Sufi shrines and death anniversaries emerged as a central issue in the doctrinal disputes between Sufis and Wahhabi-inspired Muslims. So the first two parts of the presentation examine these disputes in the context of the post-Maoist religious revival and the self-publishing efforts of Chinese Muslims, while also overviewing key Sufi concepts that underpin my argument. In the third part, I will place Qadiriyya Sufis within the landscape of Chinese religions, expanding understandings of Chinese spirituality beyond Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. I will do so drawing attention to a few poems from the night vigil genre, originally a branch of Taoist literature, monastic literature, that inspired the Qadiriyya to develop their blueprint for nighttime meditation. The fourth part delves into Jahriyya narratives of martyrdom and the patterns of pilgrimage to the shrines of one of their leading shaykhs, called Mao-era. So before we get into the specifics, a little disclaimer. I'd like to clarify that this is a work in progress, especially the third part of the Qadiriyya, which raises more questions than answers. The findings I'm about to present are subject to further validation, and of course, I welcome any feedback as I continue developing them. The idea that one must undergo annihilation or fana to transform one existential condition is a leitmotif in classical Sufism. Sufi tradition from around the world share the belief that the higher state of being, of consciousness or knowledge, cannot be achieved without dying to one's moral imperfections and being reborn into a new self. At its core, annihilation entails purifying oneself so that the divine qualities hidden within have space to flourish. This exercise of resurrecting hidden qualities from faulty human nature typically requires the assistance, the guidance of a Sufi master or shaykh, and may take the form of fana fil murshid, or annihilation in the spiritual guide, with the shaykh sustaining the practitioner's ultimate quest for fana in God. Related to fana, a key concept that best encapsulates the essence of Sufi efforts toward self-purification is taziyaq al-nafs, meaning sanctifying the self. It is about removing the obstacles to experiencing God and achieving a state of moral perfection that Ibn Arabi calls the state of perfect man, al-insan al-kamil. In a word, taziyaq is the process of confronting one's own egoistic desires and redirecting them toward the path of virtue. This process is characterized by a never-ending struggle between two opposite forces. A positive force, identified with the heart, the qalb, which guides humans towards God, and a negative force, the nafs, blocking the heart and resisting God-orienting tendencies. The struggle inherent in self-purification is by definition a form of internal jihad, or jihad al-nafs. To engage in the struggle, one must first understand, love, and cultivate this positive force in one's heart. For this reason, in some Sufi traditions, the practitioner is often portrayed as a mystical lover, willing to sacrifice himself to earn the affection of the divine beloved, eventually becoming a martyr of love. Sufi authors and scholars have used metallic metaphors to explain taziyaq, comparing it to alchemy. For example, Scott Cago writes that spiritual refinement is like refining metal with heat, removing impurities and making metal stronger and purer. The true Sufi, accordingly, is the one who transforms the base metal of one's soul into pure God. Practices like shrine visitation, ziyarat, and more broadly pilgrimage, hajj, are crucial in advancing spiritual purification, especially in Shia Central Asia. While there are differences between ziyarat and the prescribed pilgrimage to Mecca, conceptual links exist between the two of them. Both involve mass gatherings, expressions of piety, circumambulation, and animal sacrifice. Moreover, the idea that visiting important shrines may replace hajj is widely accepted by many Sufi groups, including those discussed in the following sections. In its esoteric sense, pilgrimage symbolizes the Sufi journey toward God, with the practitioner revolving around the Kaaba of his heart. For reference, the Kaaba is the cube-shaped building at the center of Islam's holiest site in Mecca, which contains the black stone. Before this inner Kaaba lies the nafs, which Javad Nurbakhsh links either to a desert thief or to the black stone itself. The practitioner can only cross this desert through the austerity of a heart, and livestock sacrifice during pilgrimage signifies the slaying of the nafs. Just as the Meccan pilgrims seek the Kaaba in the desert, so does the aspiring Sufi who visits the shaykh's shrine to purify the nafs. It is at the intersection of this outwards and inward dimension of pilgrimage that the Sufi master becomes the Qibla, the direction of prayer, toward Kaaba, and practitioners surrender to his spiritual authority, recognizing him as a model of sainthood and a conduit of the barakah, the divine blessing. In Chinese Islam, as in many parts of the Islamic world, shrine visitation has long been at the center of doctrinal disputes between Sufis and Wahhabi-minded reformers, known as the Ikhwani. In Chinese, is the Chinese for Al-Ikhwan, meaning Muslim brothers. For the Sufis, this practice is a means of collecting the barakah from the relics and attaining mystical nearness to God. In contrast, Ikhwani Muslims see it as a cultural aggression or bid'ah. Under pressure from the Ikhwani, Chinese Sufis found themselves marginalized as they entered the 20th century. Some even shifted their allegiance to the Ikhwani, who pushed to modernize Islam and free the Muslim masses from what they viewed as the feudal exploitation of Sufi shaykhs. The movement gained influence among the Muslim warlords in Northwest China, especially Ma Bufang, here in the picture, who took over as governor of Qinghai province in Northwest China. And back in the late 1930s, backed the movement's rise to become one of the most powerful forces in Chinese Islam. In turn, the nationalist government, run by the Kuomintang, capitalized on Muslim activism to promote a patriotic version of Islam, while simultaneously downplaying traditional forms of socio-religious organization that the Ikhwani consider superstitious, backward, and outright un-Islamic. This trend continued under communist rule in the early decades of the People's Republic of China, until virtually all Muslims across the sectarian divide were affected by the anti-rightist land reforms campaign, as well as by the Cultural Revolution, of course. The Mao-era ban on religion led to the suppression of doctrinal disputes, but state-backed religious institutions like the Islamic Association of China happened to embrace the Ikhwani anti-Sufi rhetoric. The Ikhwani drive to reform religion looked progressive and modern to the communists, who ordered the expropriation of landholdings from Sufi shaykhs and the demolition or conversion of their shrines into parts. Among those being targeted were Qadiriyya and Jahriyya shaykhs. Yang Shijun, here in the picture, stands out as one of the most prominent shaykhs targeted during that period. He spent almost 2 decades living in seclusion in a mountain cave in Gansu province. Starting from the 1980s, as China opened up to the outside world and relaxed restrictions on religious activities, Sufi identities slowly came back to the surface, despite states' attempts to rid Chinese Islam of mystical and sectarian elements. Since then, according to Western observers, the Ikhwani have continued to dominate higher-level religious institutions. With the relaxation of the political rhetoric under China open door policy, the rapid increase in religious devotees triggered the circulation of self-published texts, many of which are now available in Mandarin and Chinese-Arabic bilingual editions. Although party documents from early 1980s, the Wenshi Ziliao, as they are called, still portray the shaykhs as charlatans and feudal landlords, Sufi confraternities were able to slowly rebuild their reputation. They leveraged devotional literature to revive their saints and traditions. The Qadiriyya and Jahriyya offer key examples of this revival effort. Both groups have worked to translate, expand, and reprint their old texts to align with the shifting rhetoric and to reinforce the legitimacy of their systems of beliefs and practices vis-à-vis other groups of Muslims and the Chinese state. The texts range from mystical poems and prose to hagiographies, genealogies of spiritual descent, and karamat stories or miracle stories, which were handed down in underground copies up to the 1980s and 90s. Some of these sources were pulled together for the first time in the mid-2000s into multi-volume collections such as the Qingzhen Dadian, in English as Classics of Chinese Islam, and the Huizu Dianzang Quanshu, complete library of Hui Muslim literature. Some of the materials I've selected for discussion today are part of this corpus of Chinese classics. In addition, other editions have been published and distributed by unlicensed booksellers, mosques, and shrines until the Muslim self-printing effort suddenly stopped in recent years. Another key source that sheds light on the Ikhwani anti-Sufi stance is Guoyan Hazhi by Gao Wenyuan, a scholar and politician, a political figure close to the Ikhwani circles in Qinghai. After the communists won the civil war against the Kuomintang in 1949, Gao Wenyuan followed General Ma Bufang. He fled from China to Saudi Arabia, resettling near Mecca. So his work was published in 1989, roughly at the same time when Qadiriyya and Jahriyya's materials were compiled and reprinted or translated. So Guoyan Hazhi is an hagiography of Mao Wanfu, the founding father of the Ikhwani movement, and contains admonitions against Chinese aggressions, including reciting the Quran in group, visiting Sufi shrines, performing the loud zikr, and ceremonies for past shaykhs. Although in today's presentation, I focus on Sufi narratives and I won't reference this work, I won't reference Gao's works, Guoyan Hazhi remains a critical source for the conclusions I draw. So it is with this framework in mind that I will propose a choice of narratives from Qadiriyya and Jahriyya accounts. The Qadiriyya was brought to China in 1674 by Khoja Abdul Allah, making it the first confraternity to gain a presence there. He initiated Qi Jinyi, who is the founding patriarch of the Chinese Qadiriyya, and today it is the third largest Sufi confraternity. I mean, the Qadiriyya is the third largest Sufi confraternity in the country, after two local branches of the Naqshbandiyya, the Jahriyya and Kufiyya. By the early 2000s, the number of Qadiriyya followers was about 200,000, with half residing in Linxia alone. You can see here on the map where Linxia is. It's not far from Lanzhou. Let me show you. Here, it's not far from Lanzhou, which is the capital of Gansu province. And besides Linxia, the Qadiriyya spheres of influence extends across Sichuan, northern Sichuan, southern Shanxi, and eastern Qinghai, so roughly this region. Important sites are Hanzhong in Shanxi and also Langzhong, of which we will talk about in a while. So better known among Chinese Muslims as the Da Gongbei or Great Shrine, with Gongbei being the Chinese term for Kuba or shrine, the Qadiriyya distinguish themselves from other confraternities due to the incorporation of ideas, symbols, and practices from Chinese religions. Their extensive engagement with Buddhism, for example, helps explain the adoption of celibacy, a practice that is discouraged and pretty rare in Islam, but has become one of the defining features of the Qadiriyya in China. It is worth noting that the Chinese term for a Qadiriyya initiate is Chujiaren, meaning the one who left the family or home, and translate as monk, reflecting the lasting influence of Buddhist monasticism on the confraternity. Unlike other confraternities, the Qadiriyya lack an institutionalized form of worship except for memorial celebrations, held at the shrines of their founding patriarch Qi Jinyi and of early generations of masters. Known as Ermaili in Chinese and Amal in Arabic, these ceremonies involve kowtowing and incense offering, practices that have been condemned by Muslim reformers as idolatrous. As mentioned earlier, the confraternity is named Da Gongbei after the burial complex of Qi Jinyi, in present-day Linxia. Traditionally, Qadiriyya monastics begin their training early in their teenage years, undertaking mandatory retreats near the master's shrine. For them, shrines and not mosques are central to their ritual life. According to the latest data available, the confraternity has built as many as 82 shrines across China, mainly in the provinces of Gansu, Shanxi, and Sichuan. With more than 30 monastics in residence, the headquarters in Linxia supervises all the other shrines. Each shrine is managed by a monastic who is transferred every 2 or 3 years from Linxia to other places in China. Most shrines are found in remote mountain areas, with some providing shelter and meditation rooms for pilgrims. There, monastics undergo long periods of seclusion, during which they meditate, purify their heart of worldly attachments, and strive against the four sins: greed, jealousy, vanity, and self-abasement. Their practice includes little to no food and drink, as well as sleep deprivation. As quoted in a Qadiriyya hagiography, all this is done in the attempt to prolong life and transform one heart and mind into the same substance of Kaaba, which is a clear inference for the inward dimension of pilgrimage we touched upon in the background section just a few minutes ago. The significance of retreating to the mountains for self-purification is captured in a Qadiriyya piece of prose, the three vehicle of the Tao, Dao Jiao Shan Cheng, a brief passage of which reads, quote, "There are three types of pilgrimage. The first is the collective journey to the house of God, Kaaba, in Mecca. The second is an inward pilgrimage, traveling deep within one's heart, Qalb. The third is to commit one's life as sacrificial offering," unquote. And then the text goes on saying there are three types of ritual ablution. For those who abide by the exoteric law of Jahriyya, ablution is performed by pouring water over the body to cleanse it. For esotericists or followers of the tariqah, the mystical path, ablution means to purify the heart until it's free from sin. For seekers of the hakika, the truth, the absolute truth, ablution is immersing oneself in the ocean of divine love. So these beliefs are mirrored in the physical settings of Qadiriyya shrines. One notable example is the Jiuzhaoting, or pavilion of external light,
Aber dem ist das
in
jetzt auch
London,
wurscht, wenn
northern
ist
Switzerland,
alles wurscht.
which by
Es
the early
sollte
20th
insgesamt
century
natürlich stumm
had earned a
schalten.
reputation of Eastern Mecca, allowing for Chinese Muslims to fulfill their religious duty of pilgrimage without physically going to Mecca. Tristan Brown has shown how Taoist cosmology, geomantic beliefs, and Islamic pilgrimage routes converge within the shrine. Located on Panglong Mountain, the shrine houses the relics of Khoja Abdul Allah, but the mountain is also historically associated with Taoist alchemy and divination. It was home to figures such as Zhang Daolin, the founder of the Way of Celestial Masters, active during the Eastern Han, and the Tang-era astrologer Yuan Tiangang. Originally built to improve the region's feng shui, the shrine was renowned by local Muslims and non-Muslims alike, particularly by members of the Confucian intellectual elite, for its role on rainmaking and for bringing success in the imperial examination. Despite locals no longer endorsing these practices, the pavilion remains a crucial pilgrimage site in the Qadiriyya network, and along with the shrine complex in Linxia, hosts the highest number of monastics. An unexplored text that allows for a deeper appreciation of Qadiriyya shrine-centered monasticism is Yangzu Quanshu, which I briefly cited in one of the previous slides. The text brings together the poetry and prose of Yang Baoyuan, the seventh-generation master of one of the Qadiriyya factions, known as the Houzihe faction, based in Datong, in eastern Qinghai, which is highlighted here, okay, this gray dot on the top. The edition I have is the reproduction of a handwritten manuscript dating back to 1990 and printed for the first time in 2015. The manuscript was discovered at the Longquan Shrine about 100 kilometers south in Hualong, which is the other gray dot below here. The text, the manuscript, expands on an earlier version, which was released in the early 20th century, and known as the Gangchan, Cardinal Virtues, and reproduced in collection of Chinese Islamic classics like the one that I mentioned a few minutes ago. The Longquan edition contains 98 poems and short essays, 81 of which form the core of Gangchan, infused with yin-yang and five-agent theories, Buddhist vocabulary, and Taoist doctrines of inner alchemy. The work is a valuable tool for teaching self-purification. It stands out for its originality in linking the practitioner's spiritual journey with sequences of I Ching hexagrams, letters of the Arabic alphabet, numerological values, symbols, and charts that trace progression through various mystical stages. The combination of these few elements underscores the author's ambition to weave multiple sources of knowledge into a unified philosophical framework. Okay, here are a few passages from 2 poems that contribute to clarify this point. They are part of a set of 9 poems modeled on templates from the Night Vigil genre, a genre which was first developed by a Taoist monastic lineage known as the Quanzhen lineage, and was developed as a guide for nighttime meditation. This subcorpus of poems was likely designed for beginners to help them synchronize their practice with lunar mentions and cycles of time. It teaches, among other things, how to overcome drowsiness, regulate the breathing, fight inner demons, and prevent the loss of control caused by dreams. Each poem consists of 5 stanzas, with each stanza offering visualization tools for the practitioners as they progress through the 5 watches of the night, spanning from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the following day. So I will now present fragments from Disquisition on 5 lunar phases and A Wonderful Night Vigil, 2 poems. So the poems describe a spiritual journey symbolized by the phases of the moon. Each phase marks a step in the practitioner quest for mystical union with the divine. And English translation, of course, is my own. And for those who can read Chinese and want to compare different editions, the Ganchan original text in lithographic print is given in full on the margin. So the first stanza of discussion on 5 lunar phases encapsulate the core tenets of Qadiriyya Sufism. It highlights the role of Sufi masters in the practitioner's spiritual progress, alongside the necessity of ascetic discipline to temper the ego and to purge desires, eventually leading to self-purification. So the stanza begins with, in the first phase, the moon has just risen. The mendicants purify themselves through ritual bathing. This is not meant solely to cleanse the body, but to wash away all worldly desires. It is not enough to receive knowledge from the sages. We must turn to an enlightened master for guidance. With unwavering resolve, we should uphold the sacred vows. True practice begins only when death strikes. We must exercise strict restraint in eating and drinking, allowing ourselves to gradually advance towards self-realization. As desires are transformed and truth revealed, water becomes pure. So the theme of self-purification is further developed in the second stanza, where affections and worldly attachments are seen as the greatest obstacle to attaining spiritual clarity and communion with the divine. In the following stanzas, as the moon shines in all its radiance, the Sufi practitioners embodies the qualities of a Taoist immortal, with the Buddha dwelling in his heart and his soul experiencing al-Haq, which is one of God's names in the Quran, and in Arabic translated as the truth or the ultimate reality. So this is reinforced by the idea that without the guidance of a master, even the most learned one cannot attain mystical truth. So I will turn now to the last stanza, which is filled with alchemical metaphors and describes the practitioner's quest for a miraculous medicine that stretches the boundaries between life and death. In the 5th phase, the moon sinks to the west. The mendicants prepare their food and drink. The elixir of long life simmers over the sacred flame. Drink it, and you shall surpass all the trials of existence. Fresh fruits adorn the altar, their fragrance filling the universe. The jade liquor is poured from the dragon and phoenix urn. Drink it, and your whole being will radiate bliss. So here is the closing stanza. The next line mentions the Queen Mother of the West, an ancient goddess of Chinese mythology and religion, especially popular in Taoism, where she's associated with immortality. In the stanza, she's dispensing the elixir, referred to as a sweet nectar, somewhat akin to amrita of the Hindu and Buddhist tradition. Amrita is a Sanskrit word for immortality. So the stanza unfolds as follows. The Queen Mother bestows the sweet dew. Drink it, and you should return to your true home. Accompanying us are the 8 immortals, with Han Xianze, the hero among the heroes. Han Xianze is a mythological figure of the Taoist pantheon. They beat the jade drums and play clappers as they sing about the origins of the Tao. They descend all together, sharing wine and playing drinking games with us. The more we feast, the richer the flavor, until we are blissfully intoxicated. As I awake in surprise, I found the world transformed. Who knows many years have passed? So just as time dissolves, so too does the practitioner's individual self, implying that a blissful state of eternal union with the divine can only be attained after one has fully committed to ascetic discipline and reason above all worldly defilements and distractions. It is, however, not simply an act of self and world denial what brings about the union with God, but is rather a sudden moment of spiritual intoxication in which the union is sealed by a sacred feast. This resonates with the popular Qadiriyya saying that a fleeting moment of clarity is worth more than thousands of years of self-discipline. Now let's analyze the second point. Below are the third and fourth stanzas, corresponding to the third and fourth vigils of the night. See especially the underlined characters. The third stanza reads, "What a wonderful night it is," at the third vigil. What a wonderful night it is. While the six thieves rise in revolt, the Holy Land of Islam, in Chinese Tianfang, which literally is the house of heaven, is another way to say Kaaba, and by extension, the abode of Islam. So while the six thieves were plundering the Holy Land, the war-torn territories I journeyed through leave my heart unsettled. Enduring hunger and thirst, I stand in battle, fighting fiercely to drive the thieves away. I chase them where they cannot hide, with my 8-foot sword always by my side. By vanquishing demons and dispelling evils, peace is restored. Prophet Muhammad guides me from above, and divine unity manifests to me. On Mount Sinai, the banners of virtue is lifted high. So as you can see from these few lines, the third vigil is a time of a spiritual battle. In the first part of the stanza, the practitioner undergoes physical hardships as he fights the six thieves. In Chinese Buddhist sutras, such as the Diamond Sutra, for example, the thieves symbolize the five senses and the mind, collectively known in Sanskrit as sadayatana. They create attachments, disperse vital energies, and steal the treasures of one innermost nature. If left unchecked, they lead to harmful thoughts, deeds, and actions. In order to purify the mind, one must first tame the internal thieves. Only when these are defeated, the treasures may surface. In the second part of the stanza, the practitioner's success in self-purification is conveyed through the imagery of a placard on Mount Sinai, one of the most sacred sites in Abrahamic religions, the place where Moses received the 10 Commandments, and after fasting for 40 days and nights. Okay, narrowing now the focus to Sufism, the stanza also hints at the esoteric meanings of the Arabic letters Min and Wav. In my view, this is one of the most intriguing aspects of the stanza, which may require some context. So the Quran teaches that God's creative power manifests through speech. Letters in God's speech are the primordial foundation of all creation, of the universe itself, and provide access to hidden or mystical knowledge. This is the reason why the science of letter, Ilm al-Huruf, holds a prominent place in Islamic esotericism. And this is also why the zikr recitation of God names is so important in Sufism. The letter Min is identified with Prophet Muhammad and therefore is synonym with prophethood. Likewise, the letter Wav has multiple symbolic meanings. Above all, it signifies divine unity. It appears in God's names, Al-Wahid and Al-Wadud, for example, meaning respectively the absolute and the most loving one. Moreover, in classical Sufi writings, Wav is also linked to corporeal and animalistic faculties, including sight, hear, touch, smell, taste, and feelings of anger, and so on. So from the above fragments, it is now clear that Yan Baoyuan, borrowing of non-Sufi ideas from Chinese religions like Taoism and Buddhism, reflects a conscious effort to blend indigenous esoteric traditions into the narrative, stressing commonalities over differences, share mystical views over theological beliefs, and practical concerns for spiritual training over strict compliance with doctrinal principles. The fourth stanza, however, seems to minimize the Buddhist beliefs in karma and reincarnation, while alluding to the Sufi notion of fana, consistent with the interpretation of earlier generation of Chinese Muslims, like Liu Zhi, for example. Fana is understood here as unity of heaven and man. In Chinese, 天人合一. The stanza says, "Hurry up and act with purpose, for he who returns to the source of everything will find his true self." In Chinese, 真人, literally the true man or the perfected man, which is almost synonym with Tao is immortal. God is one with everything and you are united with him. Don't you realize that you are one with heaven? You eat, drink, and sit together at one table. Where is the karma that leads to reincarnation? So we are dealing here with something unique, I believe. This sophisticated Chinese Sufi text, which draws extensively on non-Sufi ideas, awaits full investigation. My preliminary analysis of the Night Vigil poems has led me to conclude that a carefully annotated translation of the whole collection is much needed to do justice to these ideas and to illuminate the complexity of the philosophical and religious milieu in which the text itself appeared. Okay, now let's turn the attention to the Jahriyya. The Chinese Jahriyya trace their origins back to the Naqshbandi community of Zabid in western Yemen. Mami Singh, who established the confraternity in Gansu in northwest China, received his initiation on the way to Mecca sometime in the mid-18th century. Upon returning to China, he introduced three major innovations: veneration of saints, seeking of inspiration at burial sites, and loud recitation of zikr. So, zikr vocalization is perhaps the most salient feature of Jahriyya Sufism. For those who are not familiar with Sufi practices, the zikr can be recited alone or in group, can be silent or vocal, and in the latter case, rituals often involve chanting and swaying. So, this doctrinal innovation caused frictions with other groups of Chinese Muslims who sided with the late imperial authorities in opposing the Jahriyya and labeling them as heterodox, as an heterodox sect. Among the other features that over the years set the Jahriyya apart from the other Muslims are their reverence for martyrs. Martyrdom has played a central role in Jahriyya beliefs because the leaders of this confraternity were put to death for instigating a series of Muslim rebellions against the Qing dynasty over the 18th and 19th century. So strong is their emphasis on martyrdom that in Jahriyya literature, dying a martyr is nearly synonym with the true shaykhhood and sainthood. At the beginning, the Jahriyya were primarily based in Gansu, but their involvement in anti-dynastic rebellions forced them to disperse across the country to avoid imprisonment and persecution. Just as the shaykhs were sentenced to death, so were all the adult men who subscribed to their teaching, while women and children were either enslaved, castrated, and banished to frontier regions of the Qing Empire, like Xinjiang or Yunnan. These events have contributed to making martyrdom narratives a main theme in the scriptural tradition of the Jahriyya, who, despite their bitter history, are today the largest among 40 Sufi groups in China, counting over roughly 900,000 followers. Half of them are found in Ningxia alone. So just a small clarification here, before we review the Jahriyya sources, Ningxia with the N should not be confused with Linxia, which is a township in Gansu. So Ningxia with the N was actually carved out of parts of Gansu and Inner Mongolia, becoming a Muslim autonomous region in 1958. So the map will help identify key places like Wuzhong and Zhangjiaquan. You see Wuzhong here and Zhangjiaquan here, okay? So the map will help you locate these places that we're going to see in a short while. So now the sources, the Jahriyya sources. The Jahriyya geographies are essentially biographies of martyrs who serve also as models of ascetic renunciation for the Sufi initiates, with the shaykh's death on the battlefield reinforcing his sanctified status. The texts on which I rely to reconstruct Jahriyya attitudes toward the dead first appeared in the 1920s-30s and comprised the following titles: The Manaqib by Jahriyya Abd al-Ahad, two manuscripts penned by Mas'ud Muhammad Mansour, namely the Al-Kitab al-Jahrī and the Anecdotes on the Jahriyya spiritual transmission. The most recent one is an anonymous manuscript that expands on Mas'ud's work and was likely published in the mid-1990s. So in this slide, you can see the cover of some of the geographies that I just referenced. Along with the geographies, the Jahriyya place great value on the panegyrics, Madai and Mukammas, both dedicated to the Prophet Muhammad. These are recited to call upon the Prophet intercession or to commemorate the death anniversaries of Jahriyya shaykhs. The ceremonies held in their memory prescribe the loud recitation of the panegyrics in collective rituals which were standardized in the 19th century. Memorializing past shaykhs and their shrines ascribed agency to the relics, while strengthening the practitioner's connection to the shaykhs across the living-death divide. It is through this lens that the following martyrdom stories should be read. So the stories are taken from their geographies and must be acknowledged for what they are. They are anecdotes that establish a moral pattern, a moral framework for the practitioner, and attests to the supernatural powers of the relics. Needless to say, these stories make no claim of historical accuracy. In fact, they serve to illustrate a more nuanced picture of Jahriyya devotional practices, ideas of spiritual kinship, and multiple layers of meaning attached to the relics and the shrines. Set against the backdrop of the anti-Qing rebellions, the stories depict the relics of the fifth generation master, Ma Hualong, performing miracles decades after death. They highlight the unresolved issues of relic custody, theft, and falsification, issues which have long driven rift between Jahriyya rival factions. Ma Hualong was one of the most influential Muslim leaders in the Tongzhi-era rebellions, whose authority extended across a vast region from today's province of Ningxia to Xinjiang, Yunnan, and Inner Mongolia. Like Ma Mingxing, a century earlier, he met a martyr death reportedly by slicing and beheading. As stated in the story Memory of Martyrs, when the Jahriyya headquarters in northern Ningxia was about to fall to the Qing army, Ma Hualong encouraged his followers to join in that, so that they could all be admitted to paradise, thereby fulfilling their wishes. Another story recalls that Ma Hualong surrendered to the Qing and died a few weeks later, framing his decapitation as an act of willful self-sacrifice rather than military defeat. The story gives detail of the shaykh's head being displayed all the way to Lanzhou, the capital of Gansu, before final inhumation at Xuanhua Ridge, near Zhangjiaquan, in the easternmost part of the province. Meanwhile, his golden body was laid to rest in Wuzhong at the Siqilianzi shrine complex. A similar account is found in yet another source, the Manaqib, which explains that the shaykh's head was locked in a prison cell in Lanzhou for almost a decade. In the summer of 1881, a mysterious plague struck the city, killing several people. The prison officer fell ill and started to experience strange visions and sounds. In one of his hallucinations, he was told to remove the head from the cell, and so he did, having the head eventually buried outside the city walls. Shortly afterwards, the plague stopped. So Ma Hualong's head is perhaps the most important relics in the Jahriyya tradition. Similar to Ma Mingxing's shrine in Lanzhou, a pious visit to Xuanhua Ridge to this shrine is believed to grant spiritual merit equal to pilgrimage to Mecca. Echoes of these beliefs are found in the travelogues of 20th century Western explorers and missionaries to Gansu. On his 1908 journey through the province, Frenchman Henri Delaunay noted that reverence of Jahriyya Muslim for Ma Hualong whom he described as a spirit incarnate superior to Prophet Muhammad. In the same vein, in the mid-1930s, William Saunders commented that the worshippers at Shuanghua Ridge turned their back toward Mecca, which means they were not facing Mecca, they were facing the mosques, the shrine complex, with their back on Mecca. Such is the cult of Ma Hualong's head that wealthy followers buy burial plots near the saint, seeking blessing from the relics. By doing so, they hope to gain what in Chinese is called zhangji, meaning good fortune through touch or contact, expecting the saint's intercession and smoother access to paradise on the day of judgment. Some take great pains to collect ritual objects once owned by the shaykhs and by the saints, like pieces of clothing, rosary, and incense burners, and so on. Imbued with the barakah of a lifetime, these objects are carried as dispenser of special merit. In a show of devotional piety, the beheaded saint is memorialized every year on the 13th day of the first lunar month, the day when, as the Jahriyya say, Ma Hualong went in occultation. While memorials take place simultaneously all over China, in the many mosques and other places of worship of the congregation, the largest crowds make their way to Ningxia. An account from 1985 states that a crowd of over 10,000 people from Xinjiang, Yunnan, and other parts of China gather in Ningxia to attend the anniversary of the saint's occultation. A place that attracts regular flow of pilgrims is the Honglefu Hospice in Wuzhong. On occasion of the 138th anniversary, that anniversary of Ma Hualong, in 2009, at least 15,000 flocked to Honglefu to pay their respect to Ma Hualong's father, an earlier generation of Jahriyya shaykhs, whose relics are all buried there. A team of local Chinese ethnologists who documented the event report that followers burned incense and placed sheets of fabric on the shrines. Before making these offerings, they rubbed the fabric on their face and other part of the body to strengthen their bond with the shaykhs and obtain protection from them. Round-shaped fried bread, known in Chinese as youxiang, was served at the end of the gathering, along with beef, mutton, slaughtered for the occasion. Its consumption is deeply symbolic, building on the imaginary of sacrifice and endurance in battle. Some practitioners hold that this gold-brown bread was the Prophet's favorite food, which he recommended to his companions during the early Islamic conquests, because the bread was easy to preserve and sustain them in their military campaigns. Others interpret it as a gold coin given as a reward for practitioner for a properly performed ceremony. So whatever the message behind this seemingly ordinary act of food consumption, the above accounts suggest that practitioners visit the shrines not only out of piety toward the shaykhs, but also to seek spiritual merit and guidance in their inner directed effort to transform moral shortcomings into virtues. Martyrdom stories, with their vivid depictions of death on and off the battlefield, support this view. They remind practitioners of the spiritual transformation that awaits them once they embrace the path of devotional love and self-sacrifice. The underlying lesson is that without such commitment, practitioners cannot attain moral perfection. And this eventually brings us to the conclusion. So, 3 conclusions can be made from the narratives analyzed today. The first pertains to the nature of the knowledge passed down through the texts. My findings show that Qadiriyya and Jahriyya Sufis are engaged consumers of esoteric knowledge, a knowledge which is both recorded in their texts and practiced through pious visits to the shrines. At the present state of research, it is difficult, however, to assess how widely this knowledge has spread. What is certain is that this knowledge was opposed by the non-Sufi Ikhwani and the state, who work together to promote a version of Islam free from mystical overtones. The second conclusion is about the role of shrine visitation in awakening the shaykh's spiritual presence and in supporting the practitioner's self-purification. We have seen that by visiting the shrines, practitioners turn themselves into vessels for the barakah that emanates from the relics, let alone the exoteric meaning of this practice, which is to bear witness to the relic's supernatural power. The shrine provides a space for deep contemplation. The closer the practitioners come to this sacred space, the easier their quest for self-purification. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that their spiritual journey toward purification takes on a special dimension within the shrine. The shaykhs buried there becomes a ladder, drawing the practitioner nearer to God, with the hope that one day they will annihilate in God and attain fana fil Allah. The fact that fana is acknowledged in Qadiriyya and Jahriyya sources, and that both groups commemorate leading shaykhs during death anniversaries, indicates that they may also commit to fana fil murshid, or annihilation in the shaykh spiritual essence. While additional evidence is needed to validate this line of inquiry, general consideration can be made on the evocative power of night vigil poems and martyrdom stories, leading us to the third conclusion. By means of a visionary, inward-looking, and intentionally slippery language, these poems and stories offer a window into the worldview of Sufi ascetics, delivering profound moral lessons. Immortals, martyrs, and relics are invoked to reveal an alternative order of existence that helps make sense of Sufi processes of self-purification. Above all, they call for the elimination and transformation of moral flows into positive qualities as the cornerstone of living. In this sense, they are less about death and more about walking through life with a newfound purpose. Thank you for your attention, and I do look forward for your comments and feedback.